I thought the ultimate betrayal was another woman's perfume on my husband's collar. I was wrong. True betrayal is discovering he packed up my life's work, my reputation, and a massive government grant for his getaway. They assumed a woman buried in a lab would cry in the dark. Instead, I allied with the one man whose fury equaled mine. Together, we turned their perfect illusion into an inescapable trap, making them pay for every dirty cent. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Maya Revenge Stories. I want to be completely honest with you today. Our channel has recently been demonetized by YouTube, leaving us without the budget to keep operating, which unfortunately means we will not be able to upload new videos here for the foreseeable future. We are moving our operations over to Patreon, so if you enjoy today's story, please support us by joining our Patreon community, where you can listen to even better, longer, and more detailed exclusive true stories featuring multiple emotional voice actors that we simply cannot share publicly on YouTube. You can join us by scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the Patreon link in the description or the pinned comment of this video. Now, settle in as we begin today's story, told through the eyes of our main character, Arya Mendez. The afternoon heat of Austin, Texas, was suffocating. But it was nothing compared to the stifling air inside my own home. I had just returned from a grueling one-week business trip, my body exhausted and my mind looking forward to nothing more than a quiet evening. Instead, I walked through the front door and found my husband, Derek, casually zipping up a designer garment bag in the middle of our master bedroom. He did not even flinch when I walked in. He just kept folding his expensive shirts, his movements precise and entirely devoid of guilt. "I am leaving you," he announced, not even bothering to look me in the eye. "I want a divorce." Before I could even process the words or drop my keys, he launched into a rehearsed speech. He blamed me, of course. He claimed I was too obsessed with my work at the Verdant Core Technologies laboratory, that my endless nights researching clean water filtration left no room for a real marriage. Then, with a sickening kind of pride, he declared he had finally found his true purpose in life. He had found it with a woman named Sienna Vance. I stood there, the silence ringing in my ears. I felt my mind transitioning from initial, blinding shock to a cold, jagged reality. There were no tears. I did not drop to my knees, just an icy knot tightening in my chest as I stared at the man I had built my life around. Before Derek could finish his self-righteous monologue, the front doorbell chimed. It was not a tentative ring, but a sharp, demanding command that echoed through the empty hallway. I opened the door to find a man who looked like he owned the ground he stood on. It was Vaughn Sterling. Everyone in the corporate world knew that name. He was the billionaire tycoon who swallowed up infrastructure projects across the globe. More importantly, he was Sienna's husband. He walked past me into the foyer with an overwhelming, predatory presence, clutching a thick, leather-bound dossier in his massive hand. He did not ask for permission to enter. He simply commanded the space. Vaughn did not waste time with pleasantries. He marched straight into the living room where Derek had just dragged his suitcases. "Your husband and my wife have been sleeping together for over 1 year," Vaughn stated. His voice was a low, dangerous rumble that commanded absolute attention. He threw the dossier onto the glass coffee table with a heavy thud. Glossy photographs and financial statements spilled out. "They have been using my corporate credit cards to fund their little luxury getaways, flights, 5-star hotels, champagne, all on my dime." Derek turned pale, the color draining from his face, but his innate arrogance quickly returned. He puffed out his chest, trying to maintain some semblance of control in front of the billionaire. But Vaughn was not finished. He turned his imposing figure toward me, his piercing gaze locking onto mine. "The affair is just the beginning," Vaughn continued, his tone devoid of any warmth but laced with a sharp edge of respect for the truth. "Derek is not just walking out on you. He is currently in the middle of a secret deal to sell Verdant Core Technologies to a shell company owned by Sienna. He has been telling my investors he owns 100% of the intellectual property. He is selling the clean water filtration membrane you invented. The icy knot in my chest shattered into 1,000 razor-sharp shards. My life's work, my patents. He was not just leaving me. He was stealing my legacy to fund his golden parachute. I looked at Derek, expecting to see a shred of remorse now that his grand scheme was exposed in the broad daylight. Instead, he smiled. It was a vile, mocking smirk that made my stomach turn. "Let us be real here," Derek sneered, picking up the handle of his suitcase and looking down his nose at me. "You are brilliant in the lab, but you are completely naive in the boardroom. You do not know the first thing about business or leverage. You will get a cheap alimony check every month, and you should consider yourself lucky. The company is mine now, and there is nothing you can do about it." He thought I would crumble. He thought I would fall to my knees, beg him to stay, or scream in hysterical agony like a fragile woman entirely dependent on her husband. He vastly underestimated the woman he had married. I did not scream. I did not cry. I turned my back on my soon-to-be ex-husband and walked over to the mahogany bar cart in the corner of the room. My hands were perfectly steady as I grabbed a heavy crystal decanter. I poured a generous measure of strong bourbon into 2 glasses. I walked back and handed 1 glass directly to Von Sterling. He took it, his eyes narrowing as he studied my face, searching for weakness and finding absolutely none. I raised my glass slightly, holding his gaze. In that quiet, tense space, a silent alliance was forged between the 2 people who had been played for fools. We did not need to say a word. The contract was signed in the air between us. We were going to turn their arrogant ambition into a pile of ashes. The morning sun glared fiercely through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Verdant Core Technologies headquarters, casting long, sharp shadows across the polished mahogany of the executive boardroom. At exactly 9 o'clock in the morning, the heavy double-glass doors swung open. Derek strolled into the room, exuding the sickening confidence of a man who believed he had just successfully executed the perfect corporate heist. Clinging to his arm was Sienna Vance, draped in an immaculate designer suit, looking every bit the ruthless corporate conqueror she imagined herself to be. I watched them from the head of the table. Derek had undoubtedly instructed building security to deactivate my access badge late last night, fully expecting me to be locked out of the building, weeping on the sidewalk while he sold my entire life's work out from under me. Instead, he stopped dead in his tracks. The smug, victorious grin melted off his face instantly, replaced by a pale mask of absolute shock. Sienna's perfectly manicured fingers tightened violently around his forearm. I was seated comfortably in the chairman's leather chair, my hands neatly folded over a stack of heavily redacted legal documents. I was certainly not alone. To my immediate right sat Von Sterling, radiating an aura of cold, unyielding authority that seemed to suck the oxygen right out of the room. To my left, and lining the rest of the massive conference table, was a strike team of the most ruthless, high-priced intellectual property attorneys in the United States of America. The air in the room was so thick with tension it felt hard to breathe. "Good morning, Derek," I said. My voice was calm, steady, and loud enough to echo in the cavernous room. "You are surprisingly late for your own acquisition meeting." Derek stuttered, his eyes darting frantically between me, the intimidating wall of corporate lawyers, and the imposing silent figure of Vaughn. "How did you get in here? Your security clearance was revoked. And what the hell is he doing here?" he demanded, desperately trying to inject authority into a voice that was suddenly cracking under the immense pressure. "It is truly fascinating," I began, completely ignoring his desperate questions and leaning slightly forward. "How you automatically assumed that just because I prefer the quiet isolation of the laboratory, I do not understand the viciousness of the boardroom. Did you honestly believe I would hand over the clean water filtration membrane, my proprietary technology, without building a safety net?" I gestured to the lead attorney beside me, who smoothly slid a thick leather-bound contract across the polished wood toward Derek. "When we drafted the initial technology licensing agreement exactly 6 years ago," I explained, keeping my tone deadly even and locking my eyes onto his panicked face, "I buried a specific clause deep within the 7th addendum, I call it the kill switch. It explicitly states that any transfer of ownership, corporate acquisition, or sale of the core patents requires my physical notarized signature in blue ink. Derek stared at the document, his breathing turning rapid and shallow. That is completely impossible. As the chief executive officer, I have unilateral authority over asset liquidation. My legal team vetted every single page of this deal. Your legal team consists of absolute amateurs, the lead attorney interjected, his voice dripping with professional disdain. Section 42, Paragraph C of the founding charter strictly supersedes executive authority regarding intellectual property by attempting to execute a hostile sale to a third-party shell company without Mrs. Mendez's express consent. You have triggered the reversion clause. As of 8:30 this morning, every single patent associated with the membrane technology has automatically reverted to my client's maiden name. Verdant Core Technologies currently owns absolutely nothing. The silence that followed was completely deafening. Derek was grasping at the edge of the table, his knuckles turning stark white as the crushing reality of his total failure washed over him. The multi-million-dollar empire he thought he had successfully stolen was now nothing more than an empty shell. Before Derek could even attempt to formulate a pathetic defense, Vaughn leaned forward, resting his massive forearms heavily on the table. The billionaire did not even glance at his wife. His predatory gaze was locked entirely on my soon-to-be ex-husband. Furthermore, Vaughn stated, his voice a low, gravelly weapon that cut through the room. As the primary financial guarantor for this pathetic little acquisition, Sterling Infrastructure is officially pulling all underwriting and withdrawing every single cent of capital backing. The deal is completely dead. Your entire financial structure has just collapsed into dust. That was the exact moment the rats began to turn on each other. Sienna, realizing the golden goose had just been brutally slaughtered right in front of her, instantly dropped Derek's arm as if he had caught a highly contagious disease. Her eyes went wide, and she flawlessly slipped into the role of the innocent, deceived victim. Derek, what is he talking about? Sienna gasped, stepping aggressively away from him and pressing a hand to her chest. Her voice trembled with a perfectly calculated tone of betrayal. You told me you had full legal clearance. You swore to me that the intellectual property was 100% yours to sell. Did you lie to me? Did you drag my investment firm into a fraudulent transaction? Derek spun around, looking at his mistress with wide, panicked eyes. The first massive crack in their perfect, arrogant romance had just splintered wide open for everyone to see. He opened his mouth to argue, to beg, to explain, but I mercilessly cut him off. There was no time left for his pathetic excuses. Save your breath, Derek, I commanded, standing up from the chairman's seat to assert absolute dominance over the room. You no longer have a voice in this company. Effective immediately, the board of directors, fully backed by my newly reinstated majority shareholder status, is indefinitely suspending your role as chief executive officer. You are officially barred from the premises. I picked up a secondary, much thicker folder and tossed it onto the center of the table with a loud smack. Moreover, I have initiated a comprehensive forensic audit of the entire corporation. Every single corporate bank account you intended to use to fund your little romantic getaway has been completely frozen. You cannot move a single dollar. Security will escort you both out of my building right now. The secure data facility located in the sub-basement of the Verdant Core building was freezing. It was a sterile, windowless vault lined with humming servers and glowing monitors. For the next 72 hours, it became our bunker. Derek had been escorted out of the building, but the mess he left behind was a labyrinth of encrypted ledgers and buried transactions. He honestly believed no one would ever bother to read the thousands of lines of code and obscure invoices he had hidden in the system. He forgot that I spent my entire life analyzing microscopic anomalies. It was 3:00 in the morning on our second night. The only sounds in the room were the aggressive clicking of my keyboard and the low, steady hum of the cooling units. Vaughn sat at the terminal next to mine, his tailored suit jacket discarded hours ago. His sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with tension. He was cross-referencing the financial statements with his own corporate intelligence network. "I found a void," I said, my voice hoarse from exhaustion. Vaughn instantly slid his chair over to my workstation. He did not hover or try to take the mouse from my hand. He just leaned in, giving me the floor. "Look at this directory." I pointed at the glowing screen. 6 months ago, we received a federal grant of exactly $5 million. It was allocated specifically by the Department of the Interior to build my clean water filtration system for 3 remote, drought-stricken towns in the Arizona desert. The funds were deposited, logged, and then they completely evaporated into thin air over the course of 4 weeks. Vaughn narrowed his eyes, his mind working like a steel trap. $5 million does not just evaporate. Pull up the routing numbers on the outgoing ledger. We began tracing the ghosts in the machine. It was a masterclass in forensic accounting, fueled by black coffee and cold fury. We tracked the missing federal money through a dizzying maze of corporate entities. The funds were split into smaller, inconspicuous amounts, bounced through a series of shell companies registered in Delaware, and then funneled offshore. By 5 o'clock in the morning, Vaughn finally cracked the final layer of the routing puzzle. He hit the enter key with a sharp crack. "Belize," he said, his voice laced with a lethal calm. "The final destination is a blind trust registered in Belize, and the sole beneficiary of that trust is Sienna Vance." I stared at the screen, my blood running cold. "What is she building down there?" Vaughn opened a separate encrypted browser and pulled up local property registries. "An ultra-luxury private eco-resort. She is using your federal grant, money meant to save dying desert communities from severe drought, to build cabanas for billionaires in the Caribbean." The sheer audacity of the crime was breathtaking. It was not just corporate theft. It was federal fraud on a massive scale. I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my aching temples. Vaughn turned to look at me in the dim light of the monitors. In the quiet intimacy of that freezing server room, I realized how profoundly different he was from the man I had married. Derek would have constantly interrupted me, belittled my findings, and ultimately claimed credit for discovering the discrepancy. Vaughn did none of that. He listened intensely when I broke down the data algorithms. He treated my intellect as a lethal weapon that he profoundly respected. There was no condescension, only a deep, silent acknowledgement of an equal partnership. "You have a brilliant mind," Vaughn said quietly, breaking the silence. It was not a compliment meant to flatter. It was a pure statement of fact. "Derek is a complete fool to have ever underestimated you." "He underestimated both of us," I replied, meeting his gaze. I turned back to the terminal, driven by a new wave of adrenaline. Something about the digital authorization signatures on the transfers was bothering me. I dug deeper into the server architecture, bypassing the standard financial software and accessing the raw system logs, hidden deep within an archived, seemingly corrupted folder. I found a fragmented email chain. It took me another 2 hours to decrypt the heavily ciphered attachments. When the plain text finally appeared on my screen, my breath caught in my throat. "Vaughn, you need to see this," I whispered. He leaned over my shoulder. The emails were direct correspondence between Sienna and a shady offshore banking consultant, but it was the content that shifted the entire landscape of our war. "Derek is not the mastermind," I said, pointing at the timestamps and the precise instructions detailed in the messages. "He is just the mule." Sienna orchestrated the entire embezzlement scheme. She gave the offshore banker the exact routing protocols. But look here. She deliberately instructed the banker to require Derek's digital signature for every single transaction. She made sure all the digital fingerprints traced directly back to his executive terminal. Vaughn's jaw clenched, a muscle feathering in his cheek. She engineered him to be the perfect fall guy. If the federal government ever audited Verdant Corps, Derek would take the entire blame for the missing $5 million, and she would walk away completely clean with a tropical resort. She does not love him, I realized aloud, feeling a twisted sense of pity briefly flash through my anger. She was just using his authority to rob the federal government blind. Vaughn stood up, pacing the narrow space between the server racks. "We have enough evidence right now to call the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We could hand this over to a federal prosecutor by noon." "No," I countered immediately, spinning my chair around to face him. "If we go to the authorities right now, Sienna will play the victim again. She will cry, point the finger at Derek's signatures, and hire a fleet of lawyers to muddy the waters. She is far too cunning. She might slip through the cracks and only get a slap on the wrist." Vaughn stopped pacing and looked at me, a dangerous smirk slowly forming on his lips. "You have a different idea." "We keep our mouths completely shut," I said, my voice hardening into steel. "We let them think they have successfully hidden the money. We do not just want to stop them. We want to trap them in a corner where not even the best lawyers in the world can save them. We are going to build a perfect cage." 3 days after our discovery in the sub-basement, Sienna Vance initiated contact. She did not call or email. She sent a private courier to my home with a heavily embossed, cream-colored invitation. She wanted a private meeting at an ultra-exclusive French restaurant overlooking the Austin skyline. She wanted to negotiate. I agreed to meet her, but I did not go in blind. Before I left, Vaughn's head of corporate security spent 45 minutes carefully stitching a microscopic, fully legal digital audio recorder into the silk collar of my blouse. The game of psychological warfare was officially underway. I arrived at the restaurant exactly 15 minutes late, deliberately messing up my hair slightly and skipping my usual makeup. I needed to look like a woman who was cracking under the immense pressure of a shattered marriage and a hostile corporate takeover. Sienna was already seated at a secluded corner booth, sipping a glass of expensive sparkling water. She looked radiant, draped in designer clothes, radiating the smug aura of a predator who had successfully cornered her prey. "You look completely exhausted, Arya," Sienna purred the moment I sat down, her voice dripping with fake, sickening sympathy. "This entire ordeal must be taking a terrible toll on your mental health. I want to help you." I slouched slightly in my chair, keeping my eyes downcast. "What do you want?" "Sienna, I have nothing left to say to you." She smiled, a sharp, predatory flash of perfect white teeth. "I am here to offer you a graceful exit. I represent an anonymous offshore investor. This individual is willing to wire exactly $2 million into your personal checking account by 5 o'clock tomorrow afternoon, tax-free. All you have to do is sign a non-disclosure agreement and immediately permanently halt this ridiculous forensic audit you are running at Verdant Core Technologies." I let out a shaky, pathetic sigh. Playing the role of the defeated wife perfectly, I intentionally let my hands tremble as I picked up my water glass. $2 million, and I just walk away from my company for my entire life. "It is a generous severance package," she stated coldly, dropping the fake sympathy. "Take the money, Arya. Go back to a quiet laboratory somewhere. Leave the high-stakes business to people who actually know how to play the game." I looked up, letting a tear of feigned desperation pool in my eye. How do I even know this money exists? How do I know you and Derek are not just lying to me again? You have hidden everything so perfectly. I cannot trace a single dime. That was the hook. Sienna's massive, inflated ego simply could not resist the opportunity to gloat. She leaned across the table, her eyes gleaming with absolute superiority. "You cannot trace it because you are looking in the wrong hemisphere. You pathetic academic," Sienna scoffed, lowering her voice into a harsh whisper. "You are playing checkers, and I am playing three-dimensional chess. You will never find my blueprints or my ledgers. They are locked away on an Aegis cloud server, encrypted behind military-grade firewalls in the Cayman Islands. Your little accountants could spend 100 years searching, and they would never even scratch the surface of my network. So, take the $2 million before I change my mind and leave you with absolutely nothing." I nodded slowly, letting my shoulders slump in total defeat. "Okay, send the contract to my lawyer." I stood up and walked away, leaving her to relish her imaginary victory. The moment I stepped outside into the sweltering heat, I tapped the hidden microphone on my collar. I had her. While Sienna was busy enjoying her own arrogance in private, Derek was fighting a losing battle in the public eye. Cornered by the board of directors and completely cut off from his corporate bank accounts, he panicked. He launched a frantic, unhinged media campaign. He appeared on financial news networks at 8 o'clock every single morning, sweating under the studio lights, painting himself as the tragic victim. He aggressively smeared my name on national television. He claimed I was a bitter, hysterical ex-wife who was manipulating the billionaire tycoon Von Sterling to destroy a brilliant, self-made entrepreneur. He screamed to any reporter who would listen that he was the true visionary behind the clean water technology, and I was just trying to steal his hard-earned success. We let him scream. We did not retaliate. Back at our secure command center, Vaughn unleashed his elite cybersecurity division. They took the name Aegis Cloud that Sienna had so arrogantly dropped and ran with it. Armed with Vaughn's immense legal resources, our attorneys quietly secured an expedited, sealed subpoena from a federal judge. Within exactly 48 hours, we legally breached the offshore server. We downloaded the motherlode. We secured the architectural blueprints for the Belize resort, the encrypted black ledgers, and every single forged digital signature Sienna had used to frame Derek. We possessed ironclad, undeniable proof of federal fraud. To guarantee our enemies remained completely blind to their impending doom, Vaughn and I orchestrated a total media blackout. We refused all interviews. We filed no public lawsuits. We created a complete vacuum of silence, projecting the illusion that we had surrendered. Drunk on their own perceived brilliance, and believing they had successfully crushed us, Derek and Sienna sent out hundreds of invitations for a lavish, black-tie gala. They were hosting a massive party at a luxury hotel to announce the launch of their brand-new global consulting firm, funded by the very money they had stolen. They were setting their own stage, completely unaware that we had rigged it to explode. With Verdant Core Technologies firmly back under my total control, I needed to breathe. The stifling corporate warfare of Austin had suffocated my spirit for long enough. I packed a small duffel bag and took a commercial flight out to the parched, unforgiving landscape of the Arizona desert. The federal grant money meant to save 3 remote towns had been stolen, but I was not going to let those communities die of thirst just because my ex-husband was a greedy fool. I reallocated the remaining internal company funds and oversaw the installation of the emergency filtration units myself. Standing in the blistering heat, surrounded by red rock and cracked earth, I threw the heavy steel lever on the main pump. The massive machinery rumbled to life. For a tense minute, there was nothing. Then, a steady, powerful stream of crystal-clear water began to gush into the central reservoir. The local townspeople cheered, children running toward the splash of the cool water. I stood there, wiping a streak of grease from my forehead, feeling a profound sense of peace wash over me. This was who I was. I was a creator, a scientist, a protector of life. I did not hear the approaching footsteps over the sound of the rushing water. "It is a beautiful thing to witness," a familiar, deep voice said. I turned to see Von Sterling standing a few feet away. He had traded his imposing boardroom suits for a simple pair of dark jeans and a plain button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up. He had flown hundreds of miles out to the middle of nowhere just to stand by my side. He was not looking at the roaring water reservoir. His eyes were fixed entirely on me. In that moment, the fierce, predatory billionaire was gone. Instead, I saw a man who looked at me with an admiration so profound and deep that it stole the breath right out from my lungs. Later that evening, long after the crowds had dispersed and the desert heat had given way to a crisp, cool night, we sat together on the hood of his rented off-road vehicle. The sky above us was an endless ocean of stars, untainted by city lights. We were thousands of miles away from the venomous scheming of Derek and Sienna. "You saved this entire valley today," Vaughn said softly, breaking the comfortable silence. "I just did what the technology was designed to do," I replied, looking up at the constellations. "It filters out the toxic elements and leaves only what is pure and essential for life." Vaughn shifted slightly, turning his body toward me. I think you have done exactly the same thing with your own life over these past few weeks. Arya. I turned to meet his gaze. The space between us seemed to hum with a quiet, undeniable electricity. There was no desperate need for comfort, no bitter trauma bonding, and absolutely no lingering shadows of our failed marriages. We were simply two fiercely independent adults who had navigated a brutal storm and found shelter in each other's strength. He leaned in, his movements slow and deliberate, giving me every opportunity to pull away. I did not move. When our lips finally met, the kiss was grounded, warm, and overwhelmingly sincere. It was not a spark of chaotic revenge. It was the steady, burning flame of genuine respect and deep affection. When we parted, Vaughn rested his forehead against mine. "I want a real future with you, Arya," he said, his voice a low, steady rumble. "But I also know that you just fought a massive war to reclaim your freedom and your company. You are not a trophy to be claimed. You are an equal partner. If you need time, or if you need space to rebuild your empire on your own terms, I will step back. I will wait. I just needed you to know exactly where I stand." My heart swelled with a quiet, fierce joy. He understood me perfectly. For the first time since Derek had packed his bags, I realized that the heavy, suffocating blanket of hatred had completely lifted from my shoulders. I was no longer fighting to destroy my enemies out of sheer malice. I was fighting to fiercely protect my life's work, my integrity, and this beautiful, unwritten future standing right in front of me. "I do not need space from you, Vaughn," I whispered, smiling in the dark. "I need us to finish what we started." We flew back to Texas the very next morning, with our minds clear and our hearts anchored. We spent 2 intense days finalizing the heavy, undeniable dossier of evidence. We documented every forged signature, every offshore wire transfer, and every piece of stolen federal property. Exactly 3 days before Derek and Sienna were scheduled to host their lavish corporate launch gala, Vaughn and I walked into the local field office and handed the entire mountain of evidence directly to a senior federal prosecutor. The trap was fully armed. The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel was a sea of glittering diamonds and bespoke tuxedos. Derek and Sienna had spared absolutely no expense for the launch of their new global consulting firm. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm, golden glow over the city's corporate elite, while dozens of journalists and media personnel had their cameras rolling, live streaming the event to thousands of viewers online. I stood quietly near the back of the room, half hidden in the shadows, with Vaughn standing like a silent sentinel by my side. Up on the brightly lit stage, Derek clinked a crystal champagne flute against a microphone to draw the room's attention. He beamed with the unearned arrogance of a man who believed he had won the world. Sienna stood next to him, draped in a breathtaking emerald gown, holding his hand and smiling for the flashing cameras. "To a future of limitless innovation and unbridled success," Derek proclaimed, raising his glass high into the air. "We built this firm from the ground up, and tonight we are officially untouchable." Before a single guest could take a sip of their champagne, the massive oak doors at the back of the ballroom violently burst open. Over a dozen federal agents wearing dark tactical jackets swarmed into the room, instantly securing every single exit. The music abruptly cut off, replaced by the chaotic gasps of the city's elite. "Federal Bureau of Investigation," the lead agent barked into a megaphone, his voice completely shattering the glamorous illusion. "Nobody move. Derek Mendez and Sienna Vance, you are both under arrest for federal wire fraud, money laundering, and the direct embezzlement of government funds." The silence in the room was absolute, save for the clicking of the press cameras that were now capturing every single second of the raid on live television. Derek froze, his champagne flute slipping from his fingers and shattering onto the stage. Total panic visibly consumed him, but before he could even process the reality of the handcuffs approaching him, Sienna executed a flawless, vicious pivot. In a display of sheer theatrical desperation, she ripped her hand away from Derek's grasp, reached into her designer clutch, and hurled a small, leather-bound notebook onto the stage floor, right in front of the advancing agents. "It was all him!" Sienna shrieked, her voice echoing wildly through the microphone. She pointed a trembling finger directly at the man she supposedly loved. "He lied to me. He used my accounts to hide his stolen money. That ledger proves he embezzled those federal funds all by himself. I am completely innocent. He manipulated me." Derek stared at her, his mouth hanging open in pure horror. The final crushing realization hit him like a freight train. She had never loved him. He was nothing but a convenient, disposable shield. As the agents moved to secure the false evidence, I stepped out from the shadows and walked straight down the center aisle. The crowd parted for me in stunned silence. "Do not bother with that forged notebook, Agent Davies," I called out, my voice clear and completely steady. I reached the front of the stage and handed a heavy, physical flash drive directly to the lead investigator. "That drive contains the fully decrypted server data from a military-grade cloud vault located in the Cayman Islands," I explained, making sure my voice carried over the stunned murmurs of the crowd. "It contains the real offshore ledgers, the architectural blueprints for a private resort in Belize, and the undeniable digital footprint proving that Sienna Vance initiated every single fraudulent wire transfer. Derek Mendez was just the useful idiot she used to sign the paperwork." Sienna's face contorted into a mask of pure, ugly rage. Her perfectly crafted illusion was completely dead, buried under the crushing weight of undeniable digital proof. Derek suddenly snapped. The humiliation and profound betrayal finally broke his mind. He lunged at Sienna right there on the stage, screaming obscenities and cursing her name, entirely forgetting the audience and the cameras. They tore at each other like trapped animals, shouting vicious accusations until the federal agents forcibly dragged them apart, slammed them onto the polished floor, and locked heavy steel handcuffs around their wrists. I watched them being dragged out of the ballroom, their faces plastered across every single news network in the country. The perfect trap had finally snapped shut. Exactly 6 months later, a federal judge sentenced both Derek and Sienna to 2 decades in a maximum security federal penitentiary. The court ordered the immediate liquidation of their entire portfolio, seizing every single asset they owned to fully reimburse the government grant. Their empire was turned into dust. On a quiet, beautiful morning far away from the courtroom drama, I stood near the roaring water filtration station in the heart of the Arizona desert. The sun was just beginning to rise, painting the sky in brilliant shades of gold and amber. The land was no longer parched. It was thriving. Vaughn walked up beside me, the cool desert breeze ruffling his hair. He did not say a word at first. He just looked at the rushing water, and then he looked at me. Slowly, he dropped to one knee on the dusty ground. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple, elegantly refined silver band. There were no massive, gaudy diamonds. It was quiet, solid, and incredibly beautiful. "Arya," Vaughn said softly, looking up into my eyes, "will you build the rest of your life with me?" I looked down at the man who had fought beside me, who respected my mind and guarded my independence. I smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that reached all the way to my soul. "I will marry you, Vaughn," I answered, my voice filled with absolute certainty. "But I am keeping my maiden name, and I will continue to run my own company exactly how I see fit." Vaughn laughed, a deep, rich sound of pure joy. He slid the ring onto my finger and stood up to pull me into his arms. I would not have it any other way. Chairman Mendez. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. I would absolutely love to know where you are tuning in from. So please let me know your city or country in the comments below. As I mentioned earlier, our channel has unfortunately been demonetized, which means we will not be uploading any new videos here on YouTube in the foreseeable future. We are transitioning entirely to Patreon. If you enjoyed this journey and want to help us out, please support us by joining the Maya Revenge Stories Patreon community. Over there, you will get access to the absolute best, longest, and most exclusive true stories that we simply cannot make public on YouTube. You can scan the QR code right here on the screen or click the Patreon link provided in the video description and the pinned comment. Thank you again for your incredible support, and I cannot wait to see you over on Patreon.